Did you know that everything you thought you knew about powerful medieval women might be totally wrong? From the bustling courts of France to the ancient Byzantine Empire, women of the Middle Ages navigated treacherous political landscapes and shaped history in ways far more complex than the fairy tales suggest. It is time to peel back the layers of myth and look at the real stories of these extraordinary figures who lived between the 5th and 15th centuries. Number 10. Lady Godiva, the Myth of the Naked Ride. Everyone has heard the story of Lady Godiva, the noblewoman who supposedly rode naked through the streets of Coventry, covered only by her long hair, to protest the oppressive taxes imposed by her husband, Earl Leofric. This image is etched into popular culture, appearing in art, literature, and even modern advertising. It is a tale of self-sacrifice, defiance, and a dramatic act of public shame for a virtuous cause. The story paints her as a simple, almost fragile figure, driven by empathy for the suffering common people. It suggests that her power was solely moral, expressed through a singular, sensational act. This widely accepted narrative frames her as a symbol of passive resistance, her act of protest reliant on vulnerability rather than political strength. It is a story that appeals to our sense of romantic heroism, a solitary woman making a grand gesture against tyranny. The detail of her hair providing modesty also lends a touch of Victorian sensibility to what might otherwise be perceived as a scandalous event, making it palatable for broader consumption and cementing its place as a moral fable rather than a historical account of a powerful figure. However, the historical record paints a very different picture of Lady Godiva, a woman who was a significant figure in her own right, wielding real economic and social power in 11th century England. She was a deeply respected countess, and her influence extended far beyond a single sensational act. The famous naked ride is almost certainly a much later invention, first appearing in the 13th century, more than a century after her death. Early accounts of Godiva make no mention of such an event. Instead, chronicles and charters from her lifetime reveal a woman who, alongside her husband, was a prominent patron of churches and monasteries. She was a benefactress, gifting lands and treasures to religious institutions, a common and significant way for powerful individuals to exert influence and secure spiritual merit in the medieval period. Her records show her presence alongside Leofric at important events, suggesting she was an active partner in their shared authority, not a meek wife confined to domestic duties. Godiva possessed her own substantial estates, and she managed these lands with considerable skill. She was not just a wife, she was a landholder and a member of the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy. Her wealth and status gave her a voice and agency that few women of her era enjoyed. Documents from the period demonstrate her involvement in the administration of her properties, including the granting of liberties and privileges to her tenants. She made her own bequests to churches, independent of her husband, a clear sign of her individual wealth and autonomy. For example, she was a devout patron of the abbey at Evesham, donating land and gifts to the monastic community. The Anglo-Saxon charters mention her by name, often alongside Leofric, but also in contexts that indicate her personal authority and possessions. These records stand in stark contrast to the image of a woman whose only means of protest was a public display of vulnerability. They reveal a woman who exercised power through established channels of wealth, patronage, and social standing. The later embellishment of the naked ride likely served to make her story more dramatic, or to add a moralizing element, rather than reflecting her true historical actions. It transformed a powerful, landowning noblewoman into a symbol of purity and selfless defiance, simplifying her complex reality into a single, memorable image. Number 9. Fredegund, the villainous witch queen. Fredegund, a queen of the Franks in the 6th century, is often depicted as the epitome of the ruthless, manipulative, and murderous medieval queen. Chronicles, particularly those written by Gregory of Tours, paint her as a serial killer, a sorceress, and a woman driven by insatiable ambition and a lust for power. She is described as having orchestrated numerous assassinations, including those of her husband's former wives, rival queens, and even her own children's caretakers. The narrative portrays her as purely evil, a dark shadow haunting the Merovingian court, a woman who stopped at nothing to secure her position and that of her son, Clothar II. This portrayal emphasizes her cruelty and cunning, casting her as a one-dimensional villain whose actions were driven solely by malice rather than by the brutal political realities of her time. The popular image presents her as a force of destructive chaos, a female Macbeth who brought ruin to all around her. However, a closer look at the historical context and a more nuanced reading of the sources reveal that Fredegund's actions, while certainly violent by modern standards, were not unique among the Merovingian aristocracy, and her portrayal as an unparalleled monster often serves specific political agendas of the chroniclers. The Frankish kingdoms of the 6th century were a brutal, highly competitive environment. Assassination, betrayal, and civil war were commonplace tools of political maneuvering for both men and women vying for power. Kings, nobles, and queens all engaged in ruthless tactics to secure their positions and their dynastic futures. Fredegund's most infamous rival, Brunhild, also a queen of the Franks, engaged in similar, equally brutal actions throughout her long reign, yet she is sometimes remembered with slightly more sympathy or as a tragic figure. Gregory of Tours, the primary source for much of Fredegund's negative image, was a bishop and a contemporary observer, but his writings were not neutral. He often took moral stances and was deeply entangled in the political struggles of the time. He had reasons to dislike Fredegund, including her support for a rival bishop and her perceived challenge to the church's authority. Fredegund's survival and her ultimate success in securing the throne for her son, Clothar II, amidst constant feuding and warfare, speak to her considerable political acumen and resilience. She was not merely a perpetrator of violence, she was a survivor in an incredibly dangerous world. She skillfully managed her allies, navigated complex familial relationships, and protected her son's interests against powerful enemies. For example, after the death of her husband, King Chilperic, she faced immense pressure from rival factions and the threat of her son being disinherited. She acted decisively to protect him, a common maternal instinct, though her methods were extreme. Her actions, when viewed through the lens of early medieval power politics, were often defensive or aimed at securing the future of her dynasty. She was a woman who rose from humble origins to become a queen, a testament to her intelligence and force of will. While her methods were undeniably harsh, they were a reflection of the age in which she lived, where violence was a tool of statecraft rather than an exception. To single her out as uniquely evil ignores the pervasive brutality of the Merovingian period and the motivations of the chroniclers who wrote her story. Number 8. Christine de Pizan, the secluded noblewoman. Christine de Pizan is celebrated as one of the first professional female writers in Europe, a brilliant intellectual whose works challenged societal norms and championed women's capabilities. However, a common misconception places her as a somewhat secluded, privileged noblewoman who wrote from a comfortable, financially secure position, perhaps as a pastime rather than a necessity. This narrative might suggest that her unique voice emerged from a place of leisure, disconnected from the harsh realities faced by most medieval women. It implies that her intellectual pursuits were a luxury afforded to her by her social standing, rather than a testament to her sheer determination and necessity. This view sometimes diminishes the groundbreaking nature of her career, making it seem less extraordinary because she was supposedly buffered by wealth and status. The historical reality of Christine de Pizan's life is far more challenging and remarkable. She became a professional writer out of sheer necessity, not privilege. Born in Venice, she moved to France when her father, Thomas de Pizan, an astrologer and physician, was appointed to the court of King Charles V. She received an unusually good education for a woman of her time, largely due to her father's progressive views and the intellectual environment of the royal court. However, her comfortable life was shattered by a series of personal tragedies. Her father died, and then shortly after, her husband, Etienne du Castel, passed away during a plague epidemic. These deaths left Christine a widow at a young age, with 3 children to support and a mother to care for. Her family was left with significant debts, and she found herself in a precarious financial situation. Facing destitution, Christine de Pizan made the extraordinary decision to support herself and her family through her writing. This was an almost unheard of profession for a woman in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. She actively sought patrons, composed works on commission, and meticulously managed her own literary career. She wrote prolifically, producing over 40 major works in prose and poetry, ranging from biographies and political treatises to allegories and defenses of women. Her most famous work, The Book of the City of Ladies, directly challenged misogynistic stereotypes prevalent in medieval literature and society, arguing for women's intelligence, virtue, and capacity for leadership. She was not merely writing for pleasure. She was running a business, supporting her household, and building a reputation in a male-dominated intellectual world. Her extensive network of patrons included members of the French royal family, dukes and counts, indicating her success and the high regard in which her work was held. She employed scribes and illuminators in her own workshop, overseeing the production of her manuscripts. Christine de Pizan's life story is not one of sheltered privilege, but of incredible resilience, intellectual prowess, and groundbreaking professional ambition in the face of adversity. She literally rode her way out of poverty and became a powerful voice for women and a significant figure in medieval European thought. Number 7. Isabella of France, the purely villainous she-wolf. Isabella of France, Queen Consort of Edward II of England, is often remembered as the she-wolf of France, a purely villainous figure driven by cold ambition, revenge, and illicit passion. The popular narrative portrays her as the orchestrator of her husband's downfall and eventual gruesome murder, a ruthless queen who seized power for herself through a scandalous affair with Roger Mortimer. She is frequently depicted as a heartless, manipulative woman devoid of any genuine emotion and entirely responsible for the political chaos and bloodshed of her era. This image emphasizes her supposed moral failings and her alleged cruelty, reducing a complex historical figure to a simple wicked archetype. It suggests her actions were solely born from personal malice rather than a response to dire circumstances. However, the historical context reveals a far more nuanced and tragic story of Isabella, a queen who faced extreme challenges and acted within the brutal political realities of her time. Isabella married Edward II in 1308, and their marriage was plagued by Edward's clear favoritism for male companions, particularly Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser the Younger. These favorites alienated the English nobility, monopolized royal patronage, and undermined the queen's own position and influence. Edward's indifference to his wife and his blatant disregard for the traditional roles of a queen consort left Isabella increasingly isolated and powerless within the English court. She endured public humiliations and the usurpation of her dower lands, which were granted to the Despensers. Her children's inheritance was also threatened by the Despensers' greed and influence. When Isabella traveled to France in 1325 on a diplomatic mission to negotiate peace between her brother, King Charles IV of France, and her husband, it became an opportunity for her to escape her untenable situation. It was in France that she met Roger Mortimer, a powerful English baron who had previously been imprisoned by Edward II and the Despensers. Their alliance was not merely a personal affair, but a strategic partnership against a common enemy. Isabella, with Mortimer's support, gathered an invasion force and returned to England in 1326. Her return was met with widespread support from the English nobility, who were equally fed up with Edward II's misrule and the Despensers' tyranny. The king of the Despensers were quickly overthrown. Edward II was deposed by Parliament, and his young son, Edward III, was crowned king, with Isabella and Mortimer acting as regents. While Edward II's death in Berkeley Castle remains a subject of historical debate, Isabella's complicity, if any, must be viewed in the context of the political necessity of removing a deposed king who still posed a threat to the new regime. Many deposed monarchs met similar fates in the medieval period, regardless of the gender of their captors. Isabella and Mortimer's regency was eventually challenged by the young Edward III, who, upon reaching maturity, executed Mortimer and confined his mother, Isabella. Her later years were spent in comfortable retirement, rather than as a powerful, murderous queen. Her actions, while aggressive, were born from a desperate struggle for survival, dynastic security, and a response to a king who had effectively abdicated his responsibilities and alienated his entire kingdom. To brand her simply as the she-wolf ignores the complex political landscape and the extraordinary pressures she faced as a powerful woman in a deeply patriarchal society. Number 6. Empress Matilda, the weak woman who lost her throne. Empress Matilda, often referred to as Maud, is frequently depicted as a woman who failed to secure the English throne due to her perceived weakness or inability to command respect in a male-dominated world. The narrative often suggests that her gender was the primary obstacle, preventing her from unifying the nobility, and ultimately leading to the defeat of her claim during the period known as the Anarchy. She is sometimes presented as an overly proud or difficult figure whose personal characteristics combined with her female sex made her unsuitable to rule. This view simplifies a protracted civil war into a story of a woman's inadequacy, rather than a complex struggle for power. However, the historical reality of Empress Matilda's struggle for the English throne was far more intricate than a simple tale of feminine frailty. Matilda was the daughter of King Henry, the first of England, and the granddaughter of William the Conqueror. After her only legitimate brother drowned, Henry I famously designated Matilda as his heir, making his barons swear an oath to accept her as their future queen. She had been Holy Roman Empress, a position that brought her considerable diplomatic and political experience on the continent. Her claim to the throne was legitimate by feudal law. The anarchy was not simply a reflection of her inability to rule, but a brutal civil war instigated by the defiance of Stephen of Blois, her cousin, who seized the throne immediately after Henry I's death, breaking his oath. Matilda fought fiercely for her claim for almost 2 decades. She was not a weak woman, but a formidable military and political leader who demonstrated remarkable resilience and strategic acumen. She led armies, negotiated alliances, and endured sieges. For example, she famously escaped from Oxford Castle during a harsh winter by reportedly fleeing across the frozen Thames, cloaked in white. Her strength was acknowledged even by her enemies. She gained significant support, controlling large parts of the west of England, and at one point she was even crowned Lady of the English and entered London, though she was unable to hold the city due to local resistance. Her struggles were not solely due to her gender, but rather to the inherent instability of the English succession, the opportunistic nature of the Anglo-Norman barons who constantly shifted allegiances, and the entrenched feudal system where personal loyalty often outweighed formal legal claims. Many powerful male claimants also struggled to control their nobility during this period. The anarchy was characterized by shifting loyalties, endemic warfare, and a general breakdown of royal authority, a situation that would have challenged any ruler, male or female. Matilda's son, Henry Plantagenet, eventually succeeded in securing the throne as Henry II, but he did so by inheriting and building upon his mother's long and tenacious fight. Matilda ultimately negotiated a settlement, where Stephen remained king during his lifetime, but her son was recognized as his heir, effectively securing the Plantagenet dynasty. Her failure to become crowned queen in her own right was not a sign of weakness, but a testament to the immense challenges of asserting authority in a violent, politically fragmented medieval kingdom, where the concept of a reigning queen was still novel and deeply contested, even among those who had sworn allegiance to her. Number 5. Catherine of Siena, the self-starving mystic. Catherine of Siena, a revered saint of the Catholic Church, is often popularly reduced to the image of a devout mystic who engaged in extreme ascetic practices, including severe fasting, that led to her early death. The narrative often focuses on her visions, stigmata, and self-mortification, portraying her as primarily a spiritual figure detached from the world, whose primary form of influence was through her personal piety and suffering. This perspective emphasizes her otherworldly devotion, sometimes overlooking her pragmatic and deeply impactful engagement with the political and social issues of her tumultuous era. However, the historical record reveals Catherine of Siena as a powerful, politically astute, and incredibly active figure who played a significant role in the affairs of the Church in medieval European politics. While she was indeed a mystic and a deeply spiritual woman, her influence extended far beyond the confines of a convent cell. She was a lay Dominican tertiary living in her family home in Siena and engaging directly with society. She became a formidable public figure, serving as a diplomat, a peace negotiator, and an advisor to popes and rulers. She wrote hundreds of letters to kings, queens, cardinals, and common people addressing a wide range of issues from personal spiritual guidance to complex political disputes. Her powerful and eloquent letters were instrumental in shaping public opinion and moving leaders to action. One of Catherine's most significant achievements was her tireless work to persuade Pope Gregory XI to leave Avignon and return the papacy to Rome, thus ending the Babylonian captivity of the papacy. She traveled to Avignon herself, despite the dangers and difficulties of such a journey, to personally plead her case to the Pope. Her persistent and persuasive arguments, delivered with remarkable confidence and conviction, played a crucial role in the Pope's decision to return in 1377. She also tirelessly worked to mediate peace between warring Italian city-states and to reform the Church, which she saw as corrupt and in need of spiritual renewal. She gathered a large circle of disciples, both men and women, who accompanied her on her travels and helped transcribe her letters and her major work, the Dialogue of Divine Providence. While her extreme asceticism, including her severe fasting, is well documented and ultimately contributed to her poor health and early death at the age of 33, it was part of a larger spiritual discipline common in the era, not a solitary act of self-destruction. Her fasting was an expression of her intense devotion and her desire to embody the suffering of Christ, but it did not define her entire life or her immense impact. Catherine of Siena was a force of nature, a woman who commanded respect from powerful men and fearlessly spoke truth to power, often challenging the status quo. Her legacy is not merely that of a self-sacrificing saint, but of a formidable political agent and intellectual who profoundly shaped the religious and political landscape of her time. Number 4. Theodora, the ex-prostitute who manipulated an empire. Theodora, the empress consort of Emperor Justinian I, is often portrayed in popular narratives as a cunning and manipulative woman who rose from the scandalous life of an actress and perhaps prostitute to become the powerful empress of the Byzantine Empire. Her past is frequently highlighted as the primary source of her power, suggesting that she used seduction and manipulation to control Justinian and, through him, the empire. This narrative often reduces her complex political skills and strategic brilliance to mere sexual influence and backroom dealings, framing her as an outsider who sees power through illegitimate means. Her story is frequently told as a sensationalist tale of rags to riches through morally dubious methods. However, historical sources, particularly those written by chroniclers close to the imperial court, paint a picture of Theodora as an extraordinarily intelligent, shrewd, and indispensable partner in Justinian's reign. While her early life as an actress or performer, a profession that sometimes carried social stigma and can involve prostitution in that era, is noted, it was not the sole or even primary basis of her later influence. Once she married Justinian, she quickly became his most trusted advisor and co-ruler. She was not merely a ceremonial empress. She was an active participant in governance, diplomacy, and theological debates. Procopius, a contemporary historian, though sometimes critical of her, nevertheless records her immense political acumen and her courage. Theodora's most famous moment of influence came during the Nika riots in 532 AD, when a massive uprising threatened to overthrow Justinian, and his government, his advisors, urged him to flee Constantinople. It was Theodora who stood firm, delivering a powerful speech urging the emperor and his court to stay and fight. She famously declared that royalty is a fine burial shroud, preferring to die as an empress rather than live in exile. Her unwavering resolve shamed Justinian into action, and his generals, led by Belisarius, crushed the rebellion, saving the empire. This act alone demonstrates her profound courage, leadership, and strategic thinking, far beyond any mere manipulation. Theodora was instrumental in shaping imperial policy, especially concerning religious matters and social reforms. She championed the rights of marginalized women, establishing convents for former prostitutes and outlawing forced prostitution. She influenced Justinian's legal reforms, ensuring that laws were more equitable for women in marriage and property rights. She met with foreign ambassadors, received petitions, and issued orders in her own right, reflecting her direct involvement in the administration of the empire. Letters and official documents attest to her independent authority and her partnership with Justinian. She was a formidable force whose intelligence, decisiveness, and political skill were recognized by contemporaries. To focus solely on her past as a scandalous entertainer is to vastly underestimate her profound and legitimate impact on the Byzantine Empire, where she served as a true co-ruler alongside her husband. Number 3, Hildegard of Bingen, the secluded mystic. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German abbess, visionary, composer, and writer, is often primarily known as a mystical figure, celebrated for her prophetic visions and her spiritual writings. The popular image tends to emphasize her as a secluded nun, dwelling within the walls of her convent, whose wisdom came solely from divine inspiration and a life of cloistered piety. This perspective sometimes diminishes her formidable intellectual achievements, her scientific observations, and her profound engagement with the political and ecclesiastical world outside her monastic enclosure. She is often seen as a purely spiritual, ethereal figure, somewhat detached from the earthly concerns of her time. However, the historical reality of Hildegard of Bingen's life reveals a woman of extraordinary intellectual power, practical leadership, and widespread influence who actively engaged with the most powerful figures of her era. While she certainly experienced profound mystical visions, which she believed were divinely inspired, and which formed the basis of much of her theological writing, she was far from secluded. She was a highly effective and astute abbess, leading her community of nuns with wisdom and skill. She founded 2 convents, Rupertsberg and Eibingen, demonstrating her administrative prowess and her ability to manage complex building projects and finances. She was a formidable negotiator and manager, ensuring the prosperity and independence of her foundations. Hildegard's intellect extended far beyond theology. She was a prolific composer, writing numerous liturgical songs and a morality play, Ordo Virtutum, making her one of the earliest known composers in Western music history. Her scientific writings, Physica and Calcite Curae, demonstrate a deep understanding of natural history, medicine, and cosmology based on observation and herbal knowledge. She wrote extensively on the properties of plants, animals, and minerals, and her medical texts contain practical advice on health and healing. These works reflect a sharp analytical mind, not merely a recipient of divine revelation. Perhaps most remarkably, Hildegard was a powerful voice in the political and ecclesiastical landscape of her time. She corresponded with emperors, popes, kings, and archbishops, offering advice, delivering critiques, and mediating disputes. She undertook 4 extensive preaching tours, a highly unusual activity for a cloistered woman in the 12th century, during which she delivered sermons to large audiences of both clergy and laity, advocating for church reform and speaking out against corruption. She courageously challenged powerful figures, including Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, when she believed they were acting unjustly or against God's will. Her letters and sermons were widely circulated and respected, attesting to her recognized authority and influence. Hildegard of Bingen was not just a mystic, she was a brilliant polymath, a forceful leader, and a significant public intellectual who shaped the spiritual, artistic, and political currents of her age. Number 2. Joan of Arc, the simple peasant girl who led armies. Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, is a national heroine of France, often portrayed as a simple, uneducated peasant girl who, guided solely by divine voices, miraculously led the French army to victory against the English during the Hundred Years' War. This narrative often emphasizes her humble origins and her lack of military training, highlighting her extraordinary courage and unwavering faith as the sole drivers of her success. The popular image frequently diminishes the practical aspects of her leadership and the very real political and military complexities of her time, presenting her as an almost magical figure rather than a strategic actor within a human conflict. However, the historical records, including the transcripts of her own trials, reveal a much more complex and pragmatic figure than the simplified legend suggests. While Joan did indeed come from a modest background, her understanding of military strategy and leadership was far from naive. She demonstrated a remarkable ability to inspire troops and commanders, but her influence extended beyond mere spiritual guidance. She understood the importance of logistics, morale, and direct assault in warfare. For instance, her insistence on direct attacks rather than prolonged sieges, which was the conventional military tactic of the time, often led to faster and more decisive victories. She pushed for aggressive action at Orleans, urging the commanders to press the assault, which broke the English siege. Joan's role was not merely symbolic. She actively participated in military councils, offering strategic advice. She directed the placement of cannons and the movement of troops. While she did not personally wield a sword in battle, she was present on the front lines, carrying her banner, which served as a rallying point and a symbol of divine approval, but also as a way for her to observe and direct the battle. Her tactical insights, though unconventional, often proved effective. For example, at the Battle of Patay, she encouraged a swift pursuit of the retreating English, which resulted in a decisive French victory. She was also a skilled negotiator and diplomat, as evidenced by her interactions with King Charles VII and his advisors, persuading them to take bold actions that were initially met with skepticism. Furthermore, her religious visions, while central to her personal conviction, also served a powerful political purpose. In a deeply religious age, her claim to be divinely appointed provided a much-needed morale boost to the disheartened French forces and legitimized Charles VII's claim to the throne, as he had not yet been formally crowned. Her presence galvanized the French national identity at a critical juncture in the war. Her trial records, which detail her sharp intellect and her ability to defend herself against highly educated theologians and lawyers, further underscore her intelligence and resilience. Joan of Arc was not just a simple peasant girl, she was a charismatic leader, a strategic thinker, and a shrewd political actor who profoundly impacted the course of the Hundred Years' War through a combination of faith, courage, and surprising military acumen. Number 1. Eleanor of Aquitaine, the Scandalous Queen. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and fascinating women of the Middle Ages, is often portrayed in popular history as a scandalous queen, defined by her beauty, her alleged promiscuity, and her 2 famous marriages. The narrative frequently emphasizes her dramatic divorce from Louis VII of France and her swift marriage to Henry Plantagenet, who became Henry II of England, suggesting a woman driven by personal desire and a lack of moral restraint. This perception sometimes reduces her complex life and immense political agency to a series of romantic entanglements and a reputation for being a difficult or rebellious wife, overshadowing her significant contributions to politics, culture, and governance. However, the historical reality of Eleanor of Aquitaine's life was far more about immense power, strategic political maneuvering, and cultural patronage than personal scandal. Eleanor was the Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, one of the wealthiest and most powerful territories in medieval France. She inherited this vast duchy at the age of 15, making her an incredibly valuable prize for any aspiring king. Her first marriage to Louis VII was a dynastic alliance intended to consolidate the French crown's power. The divorce was not simply a matter of personal incompatibility or her alleged scandalous behavior during the Second Crusade. It was a political decision, largely driven by the fact that after 15 years of marriage, Eleanor had only produced daughters, and Louis desperately needed a male heir. Furthermore, their personalities and approaches to kingship clashed. Eleanor, accustomed to the vibrant courtly culture of Aquitaine, found Louis's pious and somewhat austere court stifling, and she actively participated in the crusade, leading her own contingent, which was highly unusual for a queen. The annulment was granted on grounds of consanguinity, a common legal loophole used for political convenience in the Middle Ages. Her second marriage to Henry Plantagenet, just weeks after her divorce, was another brilliant political maneuver. And Henry was Count of Anjou and Duke of Normandy, and their union brought together an unprecedented swathe of territory under one ruler, forming the foundation of what would become the vast Angevin Empire. Eleanor actively participated in Henry's reign, serving as his trusted advisor, regent when he was abroad, and a formidable administrator of her own lands. She raised several powerful children, including Richard the Lionheart and John, who both became kings of England. She was a patron of literature and the arts, fostering the development of courtly love traditions and romantic epic poetry in her courts, particularly at Poitiers. Her influence extended across England and France, and she was known for her intelligence, diplomatic skill, and resilience. Even her imprisonment by Henry II, after supporting her sons in a rebellion against him, does not diminish her power, but rather highlights the extent to which she was considered a formidable threat even by her own husband. After Henry's death, she emerged from imprisonment and played a crucial role in managing the Angevin Empire during Richard the Lionheart's crusades and capture. She personally negotiated Richard's ransom and worked tirelessly to secure his release, traveling across Europe in her old age. So she continued to be a powerful political force well into her 80s, making treaties, negotiating alliances, and ensuring the smooth succession of her son John. Eleanor of Aquitaine was not merely a beautiful, scandalous woman. She was a brilliant political strategist, a powerful sovereign in her own right, and a cultural icon who shaped the course of medieval European history for decades.